Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets handle business on their home court, bringing in the New York Knicks and wiping the floor with them. We're going to talk about the 112-88 victory, about Jacque Vaughn, the official head coach of the Brooklyn Nets, and how things do look dramatically different for the Nets on the court.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. Yes, friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am, of course, Adam Arment, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. And joining me tonight, a very special guest, Mr. Doug Norrie, also known as the owner-operator of DFSR. For all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, welcome back, buddy. Not that you were ever officially away, but a post-game podcast with Doug Norrie? Sweep me off my feet.
What, I missed 3 podcasts, I think. I was on a 3-day road trip. It was
Felt
longer
like
than
a million,
that.
buddy.
No, good to be back, man. It's like came back to a whole. I mean, I've watched every game in between, but if you've been following on Twitter, been tweeting about these things constantly, just that it wasn't good podcasting space. It's a totally different team. This is just. I know that we can talk a little bit about who the who the opposition has been, and we can talk about some of this other stuff. But maybe it's just been a little easier. But that's just doesn't even come close to explaining it. This is like watching a totally different team than we watched at the beginning of the season. We'll talk about all the different reasons why. And it's been great. I mean, it's fun. It's funny because on the court, these aren't the players you thought we were going to start the season with, and playing really well. But from a speed, efficiency, offensive, just energy kind of standpoint, this team has it all. It's just a different group of characters than we thought we were going to see. And it's really just super refreshing to watch.
A man, a beard, and a mouthful of chewing gum. Jacque Vaughn, the official head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. And to your point, man, it does feel like as the Nets have now won 3 out of their last 4, as I mentioned at the top, 112-88 over the Knicks. And we'll get into some of the details of this game. But one of the big takeaways coming into this one that I was reading from Joe Harris and a couple of players was just that Jacque Vaughn came in. It was already there on the bench, as we know, and stepping into the larger role. And essentially looks like his first step was, let's just simplify things.
Yeah.
More passing, crisper ball movement, making the extra feed, making the right basketball play. And while the competition level can be debated, at the end of the day, they look like a better team. And then to your point, nobody's different. They didn't go out and trade 9 players over the last 2 days. Well, it just looks like a more confident team, although you can look inside as far as there's a couple of things. One, Kyrie Irving has not been playing on this team, obviously. But also you have some guys maybe getting healthier in the right moments. And there have been a key adjustment inside of Kyrie Irving's suspension. The starting lineup has looked different, but one thing we remember from the Steve Nash days was an inability to seemingly find a rotation.
Yeah.
Jacque Vaughn stepped in and said, you know what? Here's the 5, and that's what we're going to roll with. It may change eventually, but he's already trying to make consistency be a part of his head coaching role.
Yeah, the lineups just seem to make a lot more sense even without Kyrie. No one here is going to come and say, from a basketball perspective, that Kyrie makes the team worse. That's not the contention here. I mean, maybe I don't think you're contending it. I'm not contending it, right? That's not a case. But, they've clearly made the move to get Simmons and Claxton away from each other as much as possible, right? Simmons coming in off the bench and leading that second unit and, with shooters instead of Claxton is a clear difference. But even just with that first group, man, with Sumner out there, what he brings to the table, he's got an overwhelming amount of speed. Durant just looks rejuvenated. The team is playing with so much pop. Is it a team filled with star power? No, I don't think anyone would contend that at this point. But just from an attitude and just confidence standpoint, I can't reiterate enough. It's so different. It's so different. It's just the spacing is better. The movement is better. They're back cutting better. They're finding open shooters better. Everyone's making the next pass. The stuff that we saw in glimpses from the other Nets teams to start the season, and we would see it at times. It's almost and this game is a good proxy, and I know the Dallas game they lost. but it's just so much more consistent over the course of the game. It's like they don't break away from the strategies that they're trying to adhere to early on. And it's having such awesome effects to the point where even if you bring in, Curry comes in off the bench and Cam Thomas comes in and Simmons comes in, but nothing about what they're doing changes that much, which is to say it's all really, really positive.
Yeah, I think that's the point that I wanted to get to, what you just touched on, was the consistency of performance through all 4 quarters of a game. Because all throughout those first 7 games of the season before Steve Nash was fired, you and I would come on with our mission statement for the season of be positive and say, right, hey, here was a couple of really nice possessions. There was great ball movement in these sequences, even looking for the glimmers of hope around Ben Simmons, right? We were always trying to pull out those little nuggets along those handful of games. Even in the Dallas game, as we know, they lose that one, and it comes on in the most unexpected way, Kevin Durant missing free throws. But the consistency through all 4 quarters has, for the most part, been there. There was a lull there against a high-quality team in Dallas where it felt like you got a little bit, is Kevin Durant going to take care of this for us or not? But I'd say, 85% of the Jacque Vaughn head coaching games have felt like the players understand what they need to do. They feel more confident. And maybe the biggest thing too, which everything that's gone on around this team, it just looks like everyone's playing looser. Everyone's playing a little bit happier. There's a little more bounce in everyone's step. And by the way, when you win games, that usually tends to be the trend that your team goes on.
Yeah, look, winning cures a lot of stuff, right? Like culture, all this other stuff that's just sort of coach speak or fan speak for. It's just speak for winning or exceeding expectations. We talked about this many times, right? Like whenever we add these kind of buzzwords to a team, like culture or whatever else you want it to be, cohesiveness, it's usually just a way to sum up that you're pleased with the performance, like you said, that it looks looser, that they're winning games, or they're playing hard and competing with teams that they maybe shouldn't be competing with. Now, the Nets aren't going to fall into that category now because of where they are on a trajectory arc. Like, you can't have Kevin Durant and be a scrappy team. Like, that's just usually not going to be the case with a Kevin Durant-led team. He's just too good. That's going to be a championship level team. That being said, the group of guys that are around him now would qualify as of the scrappier type. When there's no Kyrie Irving, when Simmons is coming in off the bench, and when your next best players are Nick Claxton, Royce O'Neal, Joe Harris, whatever way, Seth, whatever way you want to label, like whoever the best player is after that. Mm-hmm. No one's putting that group in the top 30 best players in basketball, right? So you are playing with Kevin Durant and essentially role players. And it's almost like they found a niche by playing like this, right? Is that they're able to kind of define who they are as a team. They're not getting crushed by, like, teams aren't able to crush on like just blitzing Kevin Durant all game long. Like, teams have tried it. He's had another game where he had double-digit assists, 12 assists in this game. They're finding their way out of those traps really, really simply and easily, and punishing teams for it, whether it's by getting to the rim on the short roll, either all the way to the rim, on the roll, passing out, and making sure they're making an extra pass for wide open threes. A lot of these shots were just easy too. I mean, this looks really easy. This Knicks game, this was never close. They crushed this team. Now, the Knicks are having their own problems, but the Nets, at no point in this game was this game anywhere close. It looks so easy for the Nets, mostly because they just played to a style of basketball that fit the sum of their parts really, really well. Is that coaching? Is it looseness? Is it like just, understanding that you have Kevin Durant and that's the hierarchy? I don't know. Like, I don't know what exactly the thing is here. It's just one game, but it's so clear that what we've seen from this team along a softer part of their schedule is much more like the brand of basketball that I think we all thought we were going to get coming into the season and just didn't get. Yep. And it was a mess. And now it very much does not look like a mess right now.
No, and coming up here in a second, obviously, we're going to talk about, interestingly, that whatever we expected coming into the year, we thought it would involve a high level of Ben Simmons, and that's been greatly reduced. But then there's other pieces that really played a big role in this, like having your perimeter shooters healthy and performing well for you, which makes everything look better. So a lot of this can be timing around who you have available for you. But ultimately, the Nets are a team that would have been able to beat the worst G League squad early on in this season. So beating up on a bad Knicks team, I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah, it's funny too, right? Because you make a good point. Like, early in the season, it wasn't like they were losing some of those games. They were just getting completely smoked. Yeah. And, it'd be one thing if you're hanging in these close games and these nail biters. That wasn't even the case. A lot of those games, it was just, oh my God, they're just getting crushed again. All right. We're going to talk more Nets. We're going to get into the Knicks. Thanks for everyone joining us over on YouTube. First, going to tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. I'm sure Adam thought he was going to have to go over to LinkedIn to get a new podcast host. It's day 3. It's day 3. It's day 4. Where's Doug? It's not happening. It's time to head on over to LinkedIn to find a quality candidate to fill in the job for the other Locked On Nets host. Thankfully, I'm back. But LinkedIn would have been the place to do it. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster. And here's what Adam's going to love: for free. You add your job with the purple hashtag hiring framed to your LinkedIn profile. You spread the word that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills, like in the Brooklyn Nets, and experience. You can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
And of course, we thank you for making the Locked On Nets podcast your first listen of the day. For your second listen, why don't you go ahead and check out the Locked On Sports Today? From the games that matter most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today is available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. That being the case, my friend, 112-88, the Brooklyn Nets take care of business against the New York Knicks. By the way, the 8th consecutive win over the crosstown Knicks. It's why it's not a rivalry. It's just kind of beating up on some scrubs. Knicks suck, am I right? I got to do it. I love to get everybody riled up. But 8 consecutive wins and also 12 out of the last 16 matchups. So this has been a crosstown rivalry that has mostly been one-sided, as we all want it to be. But as we were talking about there, some of the other players here, I mean, Kevin Durant, we can just dwell on how good he is for a moment here, if we so choose, because as you highlighted there, the 12 assists, yes, but also the 12 rebounds, 11 of those coming on the defensive board, so helping eliminate some of those second chance opportunities, 10 and 19 from the field, 8 of 10 at the line, 29 points on the night in 35 minutes. And we always talk about, part of the better thing about being a cohesive unit and playing well on a game-to-game basis. This is how you get Kevin Durant rest. Be winning by more points than you need and go ahead and get him on the bench for a little bit of a respite there.
And I'll tell you right now, 35 minutes, and these were very easy 35 minutes. Like this was casual. These weren't high leverage. There's 35 minutes and then there's 35 minutes, right? Like these were not those kind of minutes. This was easy. This was mostly a stroll. I mean, by basketball perspectives, kind of terms. Triple doubles. It was about as easy as it gets. And JVG made a good, Jeff Van Gundy made a nice, interesting quote or an interesting observation as Durant was leaving the court and saying that he was kind of surprised that the Nets fans, the Barclays fans, didn't give him a standing ovation. I understand that, except that I actually think that the Barclays fans fell into the same trap that this looks so easy that it almost didn't seem like he did this, right? And sometimes maybe you can get spoiled by having Kevin Durant as the guy that you watch every single night. And that can happen, especially the run that he's kind of had to be on now with no Kyrie and Simmons in limited minutes, where it is all his team. There's no confusion here around who, and there really was never confusion with KD, but now there's clearly no confusion with who the best player is. But this was such an easy 29, 12, and 12 that you could almost forgive fans for not going absolutely berserk, him leaving the court as a hero, because it just didn't look like anyone ever broke a sweat. And if that's going to be the case with him, and it won't be all the time, but, just to go back to what you said, 35 minutes, this felt more like 30 because it just wasn't difficult. This wasn't a difficult game. The Knicks did really put up almost no resistance, and it was about as easy a triple double as you'll ever see. And so I just wanted to juxtapose that against how the fans reacted, because I think it was sort of the same. You and I were watching the game together. It was sort of the same feeling we had, which was like, oh yeah, that was pretty. Oh yeah, right. Triple doubled. Okay, it was great. They're crushing these guys. Mission accomplished. And that's starting to become. It's nice when that also becomes the sort of the resting state feeling around the team.
Yeah, expectations being met, right? That's something we haven't been able to say often enough as well. I had a little bit of a chuckle there, remembering on the one possession, you talk about it being relatively easy, but he had Kevin Durant that one possession where he works in through the lane, has multiple defenders take chances coming after him. A lot of little, like, just little slap fouls. He's getting like picked on a little bit, like getting hit on the wrist. Julian Love for the New York Football Giants. You better believe it. Also, though, Julius Randle was clearly like, he's talking smack in a way that you never want to see Randle talking smack to Kevin Durant. And then he ultimately got the foul call on a jump shot. And you saw like you're damn right you're going to call the foul finally. And maybe it's like, it looks so easy that the refs are like, do we even need to be involved in this one? It's all going according to plan, guys, right? We feel good about it. But the one thing I wanted to point out, you mentioned it in the first segment, no one is remotely suggesting, just to, as you said, to clarify, that a team isn't better with Kyrie Irving. However, flip it the other way. Say that only Kyrie Irving is there and Kevin Durant isn't on the court. Now, different players, different skill sets, different impact. But the interesting thing to me is also sometimes just the one superstar also, again, helps further define roles for the other players on the team, and the consistency is there for them as well. Because when you have two superstars to feed, we've seen it over the years. A lot of times it becomes your turn, my turn, your quarter, my quarter. That's all well and good. But we saw early in the season when they were both getting their buckets and scoring 70 plus combined points and losing. So in this game, when you go inside that box score and you see that 3 of the other 5 starters were in double digits, and that Sumner has stepped up into that really nice role, filling in the absence of Kyrie Irving, like, I think that does matter. While you're never going to create a hierarchy that says the role players are more important than any superstar talent, it can be easier for role players when they know, I get my minutes, my reps, and they come at a consistent clip, as opposed to quarter to quarter. If Kevin Durant is feasting, it impacts me in a different way than if Kyrie Irving is. And that creates a little bit of a variable. So it's just interesting to see that.
Yeah, I don't think it always matters as much. Like, I think you can have offenses and just teams that are very, one play. I mean, people want to call this like heliocentric. There's different terms that are being thrown around for this now. But if you want to, I'll just say, like, if you mentioned hierarchy, it's okay to have a hierarchy where you have a clear alpha all the way at the top when everyone understands what they have to do, because I think it does make everyone's roles a lot easier if, like, everyone's completely bought in. We've seen this many times with different players, and it doesn't always have to be just like a Luka Doncic situation, right? Or like a Harden situation where it was like, hey, those guys are going to dribble the ball 500 times. And then at the end, it's either going to take a shot, or right near the end of the shot clock, you might get a shot, right? That's not what's happening with the Nets in this situation. It's clear that KD is the best player, but it's not an offense that's running through, 18 of the 24 seconds, the ball's in his hands during the shot clock. That's not the offense that we're watching with Jacque Vaughn and KD and the rest of the team. That's just not what they're running. They're still running a spread offense that has a decent amount of movement. They're getting into the lane pretty consistently. There's no one player to all the way focus on, which again is why the doubles on KD really weren't working here, right? Like, they just weren't working. He's too quick to pass out of them. He's not incentivized to try to jack shots up in those situations right now. He's confident with everyone else that's on the court with him, and they're breeding confidence because everyone else is playing so well. Sumner's hitting threes now. I mean, once Joe Harris is doing everything but hitting threes, right? These guys that Seth obviously was an absolute flamethrower tonight. And when he understands that those are the roles that these guys are going to play, and that passing the ball is going to yield results, it does actually really become hard to defend, even though Kevin Durant is the best player. Like, defenses can know that, and it's not going to matter all that much, like, because it's just going to be relatively easy for the rest of the guys. And I think that's what we're seeing too. You mentioned with Kyrie at the beginning of the season, and I think sometimes, people, and I think some of this is like, the Simmons Claxton thing wasn't a total fit. And, there was other stuff. There's other stuff. There's other stuff here. Like, there was these aren't the only things that were happening. There's plenty of other things that were happening. But the part where Nets fans rightfully see a stagnation in the offense does sometimes boil down to, like, those guys, they might feel like they don't trust everyone else around them. The system's not totally working. Then they're going to take matters into their own hands, as they should. And it just becomes something that looks very different. So it's just really refreshing, man. Like, at risk of just repeating myself from the beginning, this is when you tune into a basketball game to watch basketball, Kevin Durant or no, any of these guys or no, this is kind of what you hope to see. This kind of movement, this kind of speed, this kind of energy. this is just kind of what you hope to see from the team that you're rooting for, because it's fun to watch. It's really fun when your team is hustling for rebounds, when your team is making the right cuts and all the right reads, when your team is like Ben Simmons misses a bunny. This is a great moment, and then we'll move on from this. Ben Simmons misses the lob from KD, right? It was a super easy bunny. Like he should have finished it. Doesn't finish. Okay, we're feeling bummed. What's he do? Sprints back 100 miles an hour to take the ball back from KD, or sorry, to take the ball back from Randall back in transition, gets the steal. They run the other way, Joe Harris transition three. Yep. You're like, oh, even the mistakes turn into good things, right? Like, and I think that these are the reasons you tune in to watch.
And by the way, and it's one of those things too, in terms of game flow too, when you're up in games, you mentioned about Kevin Durant not having to force anything. Yeah. When you're up, it's easier to not feel the need to force, right? I need to get into my shot. I need to find my spot. Guess what? When you set up and you make the extra pass and the Seth Currys and Joe Harris's and Royce O'Neals of the world are knocking down their looks, and the little drop pass that he had in the lane to Simmons for the flush that we all got pretty excited about watching it in real time. When all those things go right, well, then guess what? I can come down the court, look to get to my spot, and also give it up a little bit sooner. I think that you mentioned it there. Having that mentality of I need to take over, of course, that's always going to be the case. And when you're losing a game, when you're down by 5 and it becomes 7-10 and then a little bit of a double-digit deficit, you start to say, well, I'm obviously the guy that's going to solve this problem. And I think more often than not, that feels like the answer, but this is a bad team in the Knicks right now, but against the better teams, it behooves you to have this type of reps and rhythm around trusting the process, to use a bad term from Philadelphia, but about trusting what it's supposed to look like possession to possession, because that's what ends up breeding consistency, and then what ends up breeding more often success on a game-to-game basis.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little more about these role players here in a second, obviously, because I think we probably didn't do them. I hate even calling them role players. Let's talk about the other guys on the Nets here in a second, because I think we probably didn't give them their just, even though we just sort of mentioned them in passing. A lot of this is happening because these other guys are really stepping up.
Okay, so you mentioned about everybody other than Kevin Durant. And in that, there was one stat there that we saw. We started tracking at halftime here. Now, Kevin Durant had 12 assists in this game, but 30 assists on 42 made field goals for the Brooklyn Nets. That obviously really matters. And it matters that it does start with Kevin. But when you look at, I don't want to oversimplify it because you're going to highlight guys, but you mentioned Joe Harris, so I will just start there. Seth Curry finally got his feet underneath him and caught fire from beyond the arc, which is what we expect him to do. But Joe Harris, I was mentioning this to you when we were watching it about how the outside shot hasn't been there with the same level of consistency to this point this season. You expect it to get there, but also Joe Harris is doing all of the other little things that actually can add up to a meaningful box score, not an empty one where you look at his box score and go 2 of 6 from beyond the arc. Okay. But 4 of 11 from the field, grabbed 4 rebounds. Now in this game, just the 1 assist, just the 1 steal. But we've seen now over these last 4 games, Joe contributing with the assists, contributing with the rebounds, and doing it at a career high level. Like, those are also the margins that you can win in that actually impact you on the court.
Yeah, his per minute numbers, you and I were talking about this off air, his per minute numbers this season and everything but scoring are his career highs, or his highs with the Nets. So he is kind of more of a sort of a well-rounded player, which is making up for the fact that he's not shooting very well. I mean, I know he hit he hit the corner 3 that sort of ended the run for the starters here near the end of the game. But beyond that, the shooting has not really been there for him. But see, the thing about him is it hasn't and sometimes you'd be like, okay, there's no Kyrie and Harris is not shooting well from 3. What's happening with this offense? It hasn't mattered, right? Because you get guys like Curry. I mean, there was a point in this game with Curry where I was like, you would have to pay me money. I would have to pay money to bet against the part we'd ever miss. I was like, he's never going to miss. It looks so pure. I mean,
and you said it, by the way, in real time, because his first couple didn't look so good. Yeah. The first one went in, and then the next one went in, and you were like, this is it.
The third one, I was like, in. It was so obvious it was going to happen. Now, streaks are made to end, so that didn't last forever. But, if he's going to see, the thing is with this team now is, you have these in the range of outcomes. This kind of game is in Seth Curry's range of outcomes. He's just that good of a shooter. We're going to see a range of outcome game like this from Joe Harris. At some point, it just will come around. Mm-hmm. And so when you have enough of these guys that can fill in all the rest of the gaps, and then you get A-plus performances from guys like Edmund Sumner, whose shot is coming,
Yes.
who the game is clearly slowing down for now. Like
Yep.
we saw that, I think we saw when at the beginning of the season with him, things were moving very fast. He was moving too fast. Like he's just so fast that he can't keep up with his skills sometimes. That's actually catching up, right? Like where he's able to kind of keep everything in control for the most part. All these guys, even Cam has come off the bench and been really good. And at the risk of just sort of listing guys here, I think it is.
Royce O'Neal had a nice one tonight too,
yeah,
right? 10
right.
rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, right? Well-rounded stat lines for everybody, like becomes important.
This collective group, it's mostly just like a collective group of guys. Like no one guy has become the Nets' second best player in this run, right? Like, I would you say that?
And you'd almost would have been shocked if it had been the case, right?
Right, like exactly. It's like for bits and bobs, it looks like Royce O'Neal, and then it looks like Claxton, and you can kind of just make the list. The point is that when the rotations have shortened, and so they're and we're not getting a lot of head scratchers that we were feeling it like in the beginning of the season, where it's like, who came up with this lineup? like who? What was the thesis behind this lineup? Because
we all loved pin the tail on the donkey when you blindfold yourself and just kind of go towards the board,
Well,
but that's no way to make a lineup.
I mean, think about it. It wasn't too long ago that we were joking around that the Nets lineups had a ping pong, like a bingo ping pong ball variety to them, where it was like, did this just come out of a hopper? And like, this is who they all said, hey, whatever comes out of the bingo hopper, that's who we're playing tonight. Because it did feel at times like that was the case. Some of that's the adherence to playing Simmons and Claxton to start the game together, which they've got, it will be interesting to see what they do going forward. They've had a nice excuse to bring Simmons off the bench because of the injury piece.
And I think it's the best accidental benefit that you could have had, right? Knee soreness gets fluid drained out of it. You could have unlocked something here where he can be successful, and it need not be at the cost of actually what you're realizing really hurting the starting rotation in a lot of ways.
Well, so yeah, I guess my question there is, do you think we didn't think we were going to go there. Maybe this is for another day, but do you think they are sort of like forced to keep this going now? I mean, like they got to. It didn't happen tonight because Claxton had a little bit of foul trouble, and the Simmons minutes looked good, and he was plus 18. But I would be careful about that one because a lot of that was born off the Curry shooting.
the Curry shooting, yeah.
Like Curry not missing shots during the rotations really boosted that plus minus. But do you think they're just kind of have to stick to this? Do you think they're becoming a team where like this kind of thing won't matter? Because maybe that's the theme. Like maybe that's the theme of what we're seeing with this kind of team is if we all just understand what the roles are and we all understand the hierarchy, does it matter that a Ben Simmons doesn't start anymore? You know what I mean? Like, is that just a better version of this team? And maybe like this role player identity piece that they're kind of seem to be rounding around. Do you think that just ends up becoming part of it? It's really weird to say that for a guy who makes as much money as Ben Simmons makes. But do you think he's just becoming just sort of part of that group now? And this is what we see going forward.
I know I'll make a comp that nobody wants to hear, and it's nothing beyond the idea of how much a player makes and where his best value has been. Russell Westbrook comes off the bench, he leans into that role, and he looks like it's the better version for that team, regardless of whether they're having total success and what it's going to look like going forward, right? Sometimes it just comes down to how do we have success? And by the way, when you start the way the Nets do, you have to be willing to take different looks and try different things. I think you're right. And remember, we did talk about this coming into the season, what feels like 30 years ago, about the players they brought in. And by the way, just a side note, something we hadn't mentioned, that what looked like could have been a really bad injury for Yuta turned out to be a sprained ankle, and they expect him back in the next few days, as Jacque Vaughn mentioned ahead of this game. But if you think about the idea of now Cam Thomas getting some minutes, right? Seth Curry getting a little bit healthy here, using some of that eventually a Yuta Watanabe, those three players alone combined with, if we, assume that Kyrie Irving rejoins this team at some point, or even if he doesn't, the construction of this was all predicated on you're going to have a stronger second unit than you've had before. And you're going to have interchangeable parts from one unit to the next. So to your point, two things have happened here. One, you've proven that Ben Simmons maybe can be successful without needing to play with a superstar, with the best players on the team. And two, you've also realized that the role you first identified for him, point forward and being a facilitator, need not be on the table. He can go back to more of a 5 role. Now, he did more assists in this game, more facilitation, but you can use him a little bit more as a pure center, which separates him from Claxton. And now you're just trying to mirror these units. So yeah, listen, if you want to be about winning basketball, I think Kevin Durant's not going to check his ego at the door and say, bring me off the bench. But Ben Simmons at this point needs to. He, by the way, can play himself out of that and can take over a starting role. In this moment, though, this is a path to winning basketball games, and the Nets can't afford not to.
Yeah, they've kind of like lucked, I think sort of in some ways lucked into a situation where they have to answer less questions right now. Like between the Kyrie thing and then I guess the Kyrie thing didn't impact Simmons that much, but the injury piece where the injury gives a nice excuse to give a new look, right? It's like a non-ego related excuse to be like, hey, we're just going to try this other thing. It's a way we're going to manage minutes, blah, blah, blah. It almost like removes the one part that you don't want to introduce into it, which is like a bunch of random questions about like whether this is the right thing to do or if a superstar should come off the bench. So you kind of do give yourself a runway to make it work. And then at that point, the hope is, hey, if it's working, then we shouldn't change it, right? That's always the hope with a change like this. If it was going to become permanent, it's like, why would we change it? This is working, right? Now, look, eventually guys who are the best NBA players want to start games. Like that is just, if you make this much money and you're a superstar and you consider yourself to be that case, you don't want to come in off the bench. There's still a knock on coming in off the bench. Like, I think that will be a situation that will need to be addressed at some point in some way. I don't know what the solution is because it's looked way better like this. Right. But I do think that this won't last forever is going to be my guess. But for now, it's given everyone just the right excuses to be able to play these lineups and to bring him in with much better fits around him personnel wise, space and shooters, play fast. They're going to be, you heard Jacque Vaughn say it in one of the timeouts, we're going to be small, but that means we got to get after it. They just kind of understand what they're going to do, but those lineups around Simmons work.
I'll just go high level here for a second. And it's not, obviously it's way easier to look back now. When I talked with Matt Brooks, we were saying how he said, Jacque Vaughn he's a hooper. Like he's a basketball head. When you hear the way he talks, he's like, it didn't mean that Steve Nash wasn't trying to do these things or that he doesn't know basketball, but the way Jacque Vaughn talks at press conferences, you're like, Jesus, this guy's talking real X's and O's. He's talking about sets. He's talking about the process. And even the live look-ins during the game, listen, I'm not trying to throw dirt on anyone's grave, but Steve Nash was primarily clapping loudly in a lot of those peek-ins. Jacque Vaughn is trying to instill what we want to do next coming out of this timeout, what we want the rest of this quarter to look like, the rest of this half, the rest of this game. So, again, all of this comes back to when you're winning basketball games, it all makes sense, right?
Yes,
when you're winning games,
it's so easy.
All the choices make sense, and it's all great.
These are the easiest ones. Yeah. Like the easiest ones to do are after the W's. But there are still real things, tangible things you can take away from it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And the one thing too is, and you saw little instances here when we talk about small samples of Kevin Durant and Ben Simmons connecting well on some of those exchanges, moving up the floor and in and around the paint. And this doesn't matter. We can just keep an eye on this. The way that it always stays this way is if Kevin Durant likes it this way. If Kevin Durant prefers the unit with Nicholas Claxton instead of Ben Simmons, and he prefers, if he likes playing with Yuta Watanabe, he'd get elevated. If he wants Seth Curry or Joe Harris out there with him, it's Kevin Durant's kind of choice here, understanding that Jacque Vaughn's going to say, with the pieces that I have to work with, these are the best combinations that I like out there. But if it's working and Kevin Durant's happy and they're winning basketball games, nothing's going to change until it feels like this new iteration becomes broken or flawed in some way.
Yeah, for sure. And that's going to be the most important thing. And that's why he's the best player, right? Like, that's why it's easy to get away from KD, even though we spend the first part of the podcast talking about him, but he is the engine here at this point. And this is just the kind of game that's becoming all too commonplace. So we're going to get out of here.
Look at the clock here, guy. You come back to the show. I can't help it. We just run long and strong because it's just good to have you back.
We're going to keep going. Well, here's the good news. We're going to keep going here for a few more minutes. We are live on YouTube. If you're over there on the podcast feed, you got to go make sure you subscribe over on YouTube, live on YouTube after the games. Got a bunch of people in here. We'll try to throw up some questions here. Not going to be as long as this one because we're just getting late into the evening, but we will be doing a little bit extra on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube, pushing toward 4,000 subscribers. That's where we want to be. Go like and subscribe over on YouTube.
And of course, as Jacque Vaughn and Kevin Durant exited the court, you heard, "Excellent," I cried. "Elementary," said he. Arthur Conan Doyle, the complete Sherlock Holmes collection.
R.I.P., one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Post-podcast. Like Doug said at the top there, first of all, welcome back, Doug. Not that you were ever truly away. By the way, while Doug is doing other things and is transitioning, getting back to a space where now we're going to be a lot closer to one another, him and I are texting and talking literally all throughout the day, to the point where it could be the detriment of whether or not the family time is suffering. But the good news is you're officially back on the podcast. This will be shorter because it has been one heck of a trip for Doug, and really it's been a long one for myself. I couldn't avoid going to a Devils game last night. It had to happen. Have the @Locked On Nets up in the chat if you want us to bring up one of your questions. We did some lives earlier today kind of talking about this, but I'm curious to find out, Doug, is Ben Simmons going to be just the perpetual punching bag here for Nets fans? This was not a perfect game for him. You and I both got pretty elated when he had the putback on the Kevin Durant miss on the replay. I wouldn't say the vert was as strong as I thought at first glance, but it's still something. Like I hate to reduce it down to that with a player that makes as much as he does and with a ceiling as high as we think it is. But I'm going to take the wins. Like, I'm going to take the Ben Simmons wins when he's on the court, and he looked a little bit better tonight in this one. Some of the little things you want to see, marginal steps forward, as Van Gundy said. Where are the glimpses? Where are the signs that it's going the right way?
It still doesn't look very good.
No.
It looks slow. It doesn't look, super
Decisive.
fluid. It looks like you said, even like getting above the rim. He was never like a huge above the rim player, but even that looks like something like a struggle. He had a couple floaters that were, one was truly horrific.
We did have a conversation about that one. I was like, this guy, these don't look anywhere near when he.
Yeah, it was a right hand sort of baby running hook, and it couldn't have missed by more. He didn't airball it, but get your like and subscribe. So I think he still has like an incredibly long way to go. I think this is 70% of Simmons, 65%. Maybe that's like too low, but he's so far away still. And I don't think you could do anything at this point, but try to take some of the positives. Cause I think I do think at this point, honestly, with him, the negatives are just kind of built in. Yeah. Like, I think that that's just what it is. Like at this point, it's actually, he needs to show it for multiple games in a row before I'm going to start getting really excited. And when it doesn't look terrible or looks like decent, that's good, almost good enough for me.
And this is the part where, like, you knew coming in, everyone was like, he's got to be better at free throws. Well, guess what? He never has been. So that wasn't on my list for him coming into the season. It just turns out
that's the least of the problems. Like that's
what I mean. And now it turns out we thought that was going to be the big problem, right? Is it going to be issue late in games? Oh, he's not going to be playing late in games because there's 4 other things that he's not doing well ahead of that. So you take it for what it is, and we see what happens here. I thought that this was at least just interesting in the early days of Jacque Vaughn. What do you think about the small ball lineups without Yuta? Should Vaughn be use more size? There's not really a lot more size to use, right? Markieff,
Sharp, I don't know,
and Sharp will be the 2 guys, but
Morris, I guess.
Markieff does have some of the outside shooting ability, obviously, but the 1-to-1 of Yuta, like they don't have that. That's why they got Yuta, because he gives them a little bit of that size and a little bit of that the value on both ends of the court. So at this point, I think you're going small. Why? Because your best shooters to surround Kevin Durant with are the Seth Currys, Joe Harris's, Cam Thomas's of the world. Like, that's what you have right now. So you go with the best version of it. When Yuta's healthy, he'll get reinserted, and it'll actually help balance out what is a bigger team than it's been, but by no stretch a big team.
Yeah, like I think we've always been a proponent of getting Curry and Harris out there and just like getting as much spacing as possible, even with Simmons, even without Durant, like trying to play those lineups as much as possible. Watanabe was a nice little gift to have, I think, because he looked really good and he was able to stretch the court. Even his 3-point shooting, I would say, was running a little hotter than expected. He's got some banks and some end of shot clock heaves up there. I know you don't want to hear it, but he's got some. He had a buzzer beater in there. Like, he's got a couple that aren't going to happen all season long. And
he gave a couple of the MJ shrugs coming back down the court. Totally. Hey, baby, look what I found.
It's all been good. It's not. This isn't a Yuta complaint. I'm just saying that, like, I don't think he's the second coming here. He's not. This is the second coming of Chris Mullins. There's some of these aren't going to go in all season, and it's a loss to not have them. But even with these, as long as these lineups, you can live with the smaller lineups if they can shoot. If they all can shoot, you in the regular season, you can get away with those lineups for longer stretches, because other teams are just going to have the Evan Fourniers of the world and Jericho Sims and whatever, like the Knicks are running out there at times. And you can just get away with it. Now it becomes a different animal when you get to the playoffs, because those guys are all going to get hunted mercilessly on defense. But for now, dude, you can totally play these small lineups for 7-8 minute stretches over the course of a whole game, because if they can just shoot that well, because look, we just saw it, like you get one night where Seth Curry can't miss, and those lineups are going to win.
Right. And you're
right? Like
right.
That's like, and again, in terms of range of outcomes, that's on the table when you are that good of a shooter. He is that good of a shooter. You are going to get games like that. So, and I think that's what I think they can survive with them.
I'm impressed that someone remembered your college days nickname, Dougie Fresh. One of the things we thought about bringing back, we're not 100% sure if we're going to commit to it, but
I've heard that one since I've been 10.
Yeah.
And I'm old. So yeah, that one's been around forever.
Top of the podcast. I'm just saying, I'm Adam Armbrecht. I give my credentials, and then I say over there is Dougie Fresh. I think it could work. We don't know for sure. We can test it out. This I thought was interesting. If we think about the world where Kyrie Irving is back sooner than later and rejoins this team, and we can kind of label this, I think, to anybody, because you see Edmund Sumner filling in and trying to, I think, be the complete player, and that's born out of the fact that you're not one of the best players in the game. But it does make me think back to the James Harden role, and there's never going to be a time, I know Doug's response, you always want your best players and scorers to score, and you want them to go and do that more and not say do less of the thing that you do best. But just in the category of what we used to talk about with why Harden was so useful, he comes in and Kyrie says, you run the offense. I'll get it when I need it, when I want it. Can Kyrie Irving lean into that simultaneously and be a part of that role? And is that kind of what we've seen a little bit of? We said 30 assists on the 42 made field goals, right? Like, sharing is caring. I like, for this team, this version of them, I think it's important that everybody, including Kevin Durant, distribute when it makes sense.
I think we've always seen Kyrie willing to make an extra pass. I think that like the part where he starts cooking, one, it's born out of his skill. Two, I think there has been like hero ball part of his makeup. I think it's been there for Durant too. So it's not like that's not a Kyrie thing. I think that just
every
happens.
Superstar just
yeah. I think it just happens for a lot of these guys. I do think we've seen Kyrie able to be part of an offense that's like this. Like, I think it kind of depends who's making the decisions. Like, I think Harden was so good that it was a little easier to kind of default, like for him to default. And when that guy isn't there, it's a little more difficult. Like, I think
someone else convinced me you're good enough that I should defer.
We all thought it was going to be Simmons, and it's just not, right? Like, or at least right now it's not. And so, or we thought it was going to be Simmons, but like in a different way. But I think with Kyrie, I mean, Kyrie can clearly fit in on these versions of the team. Like, I don't think I don't think that's within question. With the part where he becomes like some facilitator, that's not going to happen. Like, that's
I think maybe I'll pull on. That's even about Kyrie. It's about the team overall.
By the way, I mean facilitator, like some double-digit assist guy. Like,
yeah.
That's not going to happen for him. That's not what he does. And so I don't think that would all of a sudden start happening. I don't even think he has it's like not even in his game. Like, it's not even makes sense for his game the way he plays. It doesn't make sense for him to like be a high assist guy because most times you want him getting to the basket or shooting. Like, so I just don't even think it would even make sense, even if he said, I'm going to go do this. I'm sure it would be a good idea.
It was funny because what I just pictured was, okay, Kyrie Irving probing into the lane, right? And looking for the shooters, looking for the outlets. But then I remembered that when Kyrie Irving gets in the lane, 9 times out of 10, he can get to the basket and finish. Like, he can go at the cup. Like, so why would you take away that element for the sacrifice of facilitating something else?
And he's just like not going to run 15 pick and rolls again. Like, he's just like, that's just not what he does. Like, it just doesn't do that. And so this isn't a negative. It's just,
no, I know. Yeah. I want to make sure that
he just plays differently.
Yeah. No. And again, yeah, I think he can do a lot of obviously ways to impact the team. By and large, just like with Kevin Durant, I like when he has 12 assists in a game, but if he had 12 assists and 9 points, I would be a little bit less enthusiastic about what he was doing in a particular game, especially if they're losing. There's 2 things here that are getting said. One that I think is that you'll enjoy, but the other one I do find a little bit interesting was saying, like, with Simmons, he needs to get his athleticism up first. Yeah. The touch around the rim is bad at the moment because the athleticism isn't there. It will come in time. The question I'm going to pose to you is just, do you think that media day, he's healthy, he's excited, he loves the way it looks? Is there any world where that weight of expectations, he is healthy, but the weight of expectations is what has you put him out there to start the season and be in the lineup and get this thing rolling? And also, maybe he shouldn't have been coming right into things to start the season. Like maybe there was just a world where he practices with the team and you find the right time when it looks like it's clicking to start bringing him into live game action.
Yeah, I have no idea. Yeah. I mean, there were times in the preseason where it did look pretty good. Like, I think there was like the third preseason game where you're like, oh, here we go. Right. Like it was that version of it. And it just wasn't consistent. I don't think they were probably ever at its point where it wasn't looking good enough to start. I just think that they got in a weird spot. Three simultaneous things happened. One, the starting lineup, which you had to start with, just really didn't work. Right. Like they had to start. That was their best 5 players. And it wasn't their best 5 fit, but it was their best 5 players at the time, right? And they just kind of had to start with that. And the Simmons Claxton thing just didn't work. I think that was problem one. And then you kind of compound on that with the part where then he's maybe not fully healthy, right? At all the time. He's like working way back in the shape. So now you have like a bad lineup that's sharing the court a lot of the time together and a guy that's not fully healthy. And then third, you have a guy who clearly has at times confidence issues. And that's just going to be a confidence killer.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and to some degree, no fault of his own, the lineups just don't make sense. Just think that it looks so much better when he doesn't play with Claxton. Mm-hmm. It's obvious. I understand why they started those guys together at the beginning of the season. Hey, we'll make up for it on defense. It'll be super length. These are the best players. We can't really tell one of these guys they're not starting. Like, there's a bunch of reasons why you can't do it. It just didn't really work. And so I think those 3 things combined to sort of just put him a little behind the 8 ball when it came to like best outcomes, because I think it was just always going to be really hard. And those starting lineup numbers are horrible. Yeah. Like the net rating on that, it's like so far in the negative because they just couldn't make up for that scoring. And there's no Harris and there's no Curry and they can't get enough shooting. Like there's all these problems at the beginning of the season and they played 5 really good playoff teams right to start. Like there were so many things that worked against them to start the season.
What would you like to do with here? A trade question, a minutes question, or a Woj comment from the in-game coverage?
Oh, I don't care. You pick. We can just do it. Yeah.
All right. Would you trade Ben Simmons? Well, I'm going to shoot this one down. They said change Ben.
You're not trading him. You can't trade him for anything.
Trade Ben Simmons for Sabonis, and I saw this somewhere else, and he doesn't have any value, and they want to have him.
Kings never do it. You cannot trade Ben Simmons. We just save the time on the trade machine. No one is trading for Ben Simmons right now.
Let's go with the Woj one here from Pimp Nade Slickback, who I'm always a fan of this. Also, someone else mentioned that Dougie Fresh is trending currently, so be aware of that.
I looked that up. He was lying. I looked it up.
We're gonna get there. Woj said in his sideline report tonight that Kyrie has not spoken to anyone in the organization, and he doesn't anticipate him returning after the 5 games. Is he here long term or is he out? And what I'll say is just in conjunction with that, because someone else was asking, where do the minutes shake out if Kyrie rejoins the team? Who goes to the bench or who loses it? Cam being the guy that has come in here. I think Sumner would be the obvious one, and he gets a nice little bench role. Cam Thomas continues to have opportunities if we're talking about him returning. I don't want to get too far down this road because we'll have time to discuss it. Obviously, this is kind of like the waiting with bated breath. What is the result of everything that's gone on? Is Kyrie Irving on board with what needs to get done, quote unquote, for him to be back in the good graces? Or is he not? Because that obviously is then the next big domino to fall here. And this is the question I didn't get to ask you, actually. Let's close on this. Jacque Vaughn being appointed the head coach, did you feel that was indicative of anything in terms of where this team is headed in the short term, as opposed to Ime is off the table, but looking for another high profile name to bring in? Do you read anything into that?
No, I don't think they had anyone else to hire. I think that.
By the way, go back to what you would know. You had said this about maybe with the Nets' current situation and Ime Udoka's current situation, these might be the only 2 that can pair together right now, because what coach would say, yeah, give me a crack at that mess, as opposed to Jacque Vaughn who's in house.
And it was already a PR nightmare before he even walked it through the door, and they jumped out of that one really quickly. And Jacque was there. I think it's as easy as that. I think it's that. And then with Kyrie, without any new information, although I do find that Nets that Woj thing interesting, and I didn't hear him say that. We were watching that together. Maybe we were just talking or something when he was talking. But
I'll double check just to confirm what he spoke to there, because I know
I
he hit all the high
have a new opinion. I'm unchanged on my original opinion, which was I don't think he's going to be back. I have, and that was my original opinion, and would love to change it, and I hope I'm wrong. Like, I don't want to be, look, if you've ever interacted with me or Adam, we have no problem being wrong. We'll admit when we're wrong. You know what I mean? Like, it's really easy for us to do, but people make mistakes. At the time when they released the statement about him not his 5-game suspension, my immediate reaction was he's not coming back. That's just that release was so harsh and was so definitive and had wording in it that you never ever see teams use around players ever. Yeah. Like, we don't want the term, we don't want to be associated with Kyrie Irving. I understand it was around the context around what he did. Teams never ever use that language around a player because it's too definitive. Like, you never want to close doors on relationships like that around players because it doesn't make any sense. And so anyway, the Woj saying that doesn't surprise me. But I wouldn't have needed to hear that to say that I still stand by my original thing was I'd be shocked if he came back. And I hope that that's wrong. And I know he had a productive meeting with Adam Silver. I don't know exactly what happened there. I think that's like Nets independent. Like, right. I think that I don't think I just would be shocked if he came back. Like, there's if I put myself in his shoes.
Yeah.
Like,
I
said this last year. I said this last year when we were talking about the negotiations. I was like, everyone wants to think there's like this certain way negotiations are going with Kyrie Irving. It was so easy to give the Kyrie Irving his side of the negotiations, and have him be really unhappy with the team. You didn't back me up during the vaccine thing. You threw me out. You cut me out to dry there. Like,
I'm one of the best players in the game.
Exactly. Like, it was so easy it's so easy from his standpoint to put this together. I think this situation would be the exact same. Like, I think he would be like, you cut me loose. You didn't stick up for me. You didn't help me with this situation. Like, whatever. Like, there's a million ways to take this.
Yeah.
And I just think that, like, the way it was handled at the time, I just would still be very surprised if he came back. And that's not sourced. That's just my opinion. And I don't know. That's just where I stand with Kyrie, and I hope I'm wrong.
All right, let's leave it there on a on an.
By the way, Nets win. I was
gonna say, yeah, right. 112-88, the Brooklyn Nets 8th straight win over those just miserable, pathetic New York Knicks. Am I right, comrades? You guys get it. Anywho, we'll be back in. We have a very nice special guest lined up for Friday. We'll keep the name under wraps until that officially gets recorded, but be sure to stay tuned for that one. And then obviously we'll be coming back in next week. We'll always be talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. We appreciate everybody in on the live YouTube here, up over 200 people doing our thing, welcoming back Doug. Let's let the man get some rest. Let's say goodnight to Powder Toast Man. You guys know the reference, and we'll see you right back here talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.